You're welcome back to the conversation on News Central Television. The first half of the program, we did look at the situation in Rwanda, where the United States president has called for the release of Paul Rusesabagina. The Rwandan government is defiant, but it's time for us to switch gears and look into other issues. President Biden proclaimed on Wednesday that the United States and other G7 countries will donate billions to get South Africa off coal and on renewables. The announcement was part of a joint portfolio of partnership for global infrastructure investment projects already underway in Africa. Biden declared at the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. It says it includes mobilizing $8 billion in public and private finance to help South Africa replace coal-fired power plants with renewable energy sources. President Biden also said money will be spent to help develop cutting-edge energy solutions like clean hydrogen. A deal worth $2 billion to build solar energy projects in Angola, 600 million high-speed communications cables that will connect Southeast Asia to Europe via Egypt and the Horn of Africa and help bring high-speed internet connectivity to countries all along the way. Now, joining me live from South Africa to discuss this is Chris Yelland. He's an energy analyst, consultant, electrical engineer and managing director at EE Business Intelligence. A warm welcome to you, Chris, and thanks for joining us on the conversation.
Good evening, and thank you for having me on your show.
Now, Chris, what's your reaction to President Biden's pledge of mobilizing $8 billion to help South Africa replace coal-fired power plants with renewable energy sources?
Well, just to clarify, this is not a donation at all. It is effectively largely a loan. It has to be paid back. But it is a loan at preferential interest rates. And there is a small component of this, which is grant funding that is mainly intended for studies of various kinds, on this subject. But it should not be thought that this is some kind of a donation. It is finance, and it's welcome, I think, by sensible people in South Africa. But it has to be paid back.
Thank you for that clarification, Chris.
Yeah, so I think it is welcome, and it will make a start for what is known as the just energy transition in South Africa. That is the accelerated decommissioning of old end-of-life coal-fired power plants and their replacement with cleaner, greener solutions. That will also help in jobs and revitalizing old coal mining areas of South Africa.
Okay, thank you, Chris. What's the reaction been in South Africa to this deal?
I think it is largely been welcomed, and again, just to remind you that this is not coming only from the United States. This is coming from a group of 5 countries, that is the United States, UK, France, Germany, and the European Union. And I think it's been generally welcomed, although there are people in South Africa, mainly the coal mining industry and various activities related thereto. One might call them the coal lobby. They, of course, are trying to defend coal and extend the life of coal-fired power and even expand it in South Africa. But I think they are a minority, and I think the general consensus is that we're going to have to decommission these old coal-fired power stations anyway, and therefore we should welcome the opportunity of getting finance at preferential rates to replace this with clean energy solutions.
Now, Chris, just yesterday, South African state power utility Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter resigned, the company said on Wednesday, marking the 11th boss to have left the company in just a decade. I mean, it just shows how terrible the situation is with the state utility. Now, how grim is the South African energy situation right now with South Africa's electricity needs?
Yeah, it is particularly grim at the moment. We're now on the 16th of December, which is a public holiday in South Africa, and is really officially the start of the summer shutdown period where business and industry really slowed down significantly over the Christmas period. And so demand for electricity right now is very low, recently, and it will remain low until probably around about the middle of January. But even in this low demand period, we are experiencing what is known here as stage 6 load shedding. That means that approximately 6,000 megawatts of load has to be switched off in order to balance supply and demand. In other words, there's a shortfall of supply of 6,000 megawatts, and this means that they have to shed load. This is incredibly disruptive to South African economy, and stage 6 load shedding means that there's something like 8 to 10 hours per day. So 10 out of 24 hours is without power in South Africa. So it's really causing significant problems, and coming as it does at this low demand period is particularly concerning, because if the situation persists when demand for electricity picks up in the new year, around 15th of January, we're going to be pushed into even higher stages of load shedding. Up to now in South Africa, we've never experienced anything beyond stage 6. But now that we're having it in the low demand period of the year, is a signal that things might get considerably worse next year.
Quite not good news there coming from Africa's most industrialized economy, and this have ripple effects on industries and production and the economy in general. But following this announcement in Washington, D.C., how soon are we going to see these investments come to fore? How soon would it help South Africa's energy needs?
Look, there are no quick solutions to South Africa's energy problems that will come from the public procurement processes from the National Electricity Utility, Eskom. The public procurement processes are very slow and bureaucratic, and sometimes it can take 2 years or more simply to place an order. And then, of course, there is the construction period, which even at the very quickest for renewable energy, wind and solar utility scale plants, you're looking at 16 to 24 months to construct. So that takes it to us on at least 4 years before we're going to see the large-scale public procurements coming to the grid. So customers have to look to alternatives, quicker solutions, and the quickest solutions will come from solar, photovoltaic, and battery storage installations on the rooftops and even on the ground of domestic, commercial, industrial, mining, and agricultural customers, all of whom will be looking to do what is known as self-generation, embedded generation, or distributed generation to supplement their energy needs, and therefore reduce the demands on the Eskom supply, on the grid supply, and therefore that would alleviate load shedding. So the solutions in the short term, and by that I'm talking about in the next 3 years, can only come from the customers of electricity themselves. And customers in South Africa are waking up to the realization that they have to take control of their own energy future, and in doing so, they will relieve Eskom of a burden that it is currently unable to meet.
Now, Chris, I'm going to, you just painted the picture for us that procurement and bureaucracy and what have you before the construction period. So there's no quick solution. So there's those that might have been excited over the announcement yesterday. So very basic question here, chicken and egg situation. even with its coal-fired plants, South Africa is still struggling to meet its energy needs. So, looking at this deal and this investment that was announced in Washington, which one comes first? You get rid of the coal-fired plants, or the renewables come first? How is all of this going to pan out?
Yeah, but one thing I must also stress is that it is not yet a fait accompli that this financial arrangement from these five countries it has not materialized yet. So it is still under negotiation. And there are concerns that the pace at which South Africa is moving compared to other countries around the world, such as Indonesia, for example, Vietnam, who are also receiving financial support for their energy transition. These countries seem to be able to move much quicker than South Africa. So, for a start, we need to finalize this deal. And I must also add that $8.5 billion US is a lot of funding, but it is very, very far from the kind of funding that is required. Probably 10 times more is required to put South Africa's electricity supply on a sound footing, with reduced carbonization. But the positive aspect to all of this is that if South Africa can meet its milestones and commitments and successfully implement these projects, I believe there is significant further funding available from developed countries for whom a successful transition in South Africa is very important, because South Africa has a very high penetration of coal-fired power in South Africa. So something like 85% of all electricity in South Africa comes from coal. And therefore, the cost of decarbonizing in South Africa is much lower than the cost of decarbonization elsewhere in the world. For example, in Europe and the United States and other developed countries who have got much lower amount of coal-fired power in their mix. So because of our high coal in the mix, this represents a very significant opportunity for the world to reduce carbon emissions at lower cost, at least cost. And so if we can be successful in the first stages of these projects, which the $8.5 billion US is intended for, there is the promise of more funding to come. And that is the challenge. South Africa needs to grasp this challenge. It needs to execute these projects successfully, and then there will be more funding available.
Okay, Chris, now under the Just Energy Transition Partnership, the $8.2 billion United dollars deal to go green, South Africa is expected to wean off its codependency within 5 years. Do you think the country will be able to achieve this milestone given its current challenges?
Yeah, look, South Africa has committed to becoming carbon zero by 2050, along with many other countries. It is a huge challenge. But I do believe that it is achievable if we set our mind to it. And the big plus in this whole thing is that South Africa's coal-fired power plants, many of them are at end of life or at approaching end of life at the moment. And therefore, we're going to have to replace these power plants come what may. And you can see this from the state of electricity in South Africa, with very high levels of unplanned failures in the power plant. This is a result of these aging power plants that have been very poorly maintained and abused in the past. So we're going to have to spend this money anyway. And therefore, it makes a lot of sense to spend the money and in a way that can decarbonize South Africa and prepare our economy for the future.
Now, just before we begin to wrap things up, Chris, many African nations are at a crossroads and whether to continue with oil explorations or switch to green energy options. How do they balance their economic interest, energy needs, and climate change commitments?
Yeah, it is a difficult balance, but the reality is that the cost of failing to decarbonize, and that's the cost to the world, it is greater than the cost to decarbonize. As high as the cost of decarbonization is, the cost of doing nothing is even higher.
True.
Now, in the case of Africa, there is an argument, and I believe it's a valid argument, that in many countries of Africa, the level of carbon emissions is relatively low, very low, in fact, compared to the industrialized countries. And whilst this is valid for many countries in Africa, it is not valid for South Africa. South Africa is part of the problem. South Africa has a high carbon intensity. In fact, per capita, we have one of the highest carbon intensities in the world. So whilst I think there is a valid argument that there should be, that there is less demand on undeveloped countries or developing countries in Africa, in South Africa, our power generation emissions and our emissions from the production of synthetic fuel, that means petrol that is produced from coal. Our emissions are incredibly high and stand out like a sore thumb on the African continent. So I believe that some people in South Africa use the African argument inappropriately. They lump themselves with the African continent, which has got low carbon emissions, where South Africa, in fact, has very high carbon emissions per capita.
Now, finally, Chris, South Africa is at the forefront of switching to renewable energy, an ambition that has been evasive for many African countries, which are discovering more and more fossil fuel deposits every other day. So, how are you confident that South Africa will see this through, or how confident are you that they will see this through?
Yeah, when we look at the realities, the political realities in South Africa, it is contested. There are elements that are strongly in favor of making the energy transition as slow as possible. There are other elements that are intent on making this transition as fast as possible. I think the reality will turn out somewhere between the two. And the difficult, the decision that needs to be faced is how fast are we able to do this? And that's really where I think the argument lies, somewhere between as fast as possible or as slow as possible. I am confident that the current powers that be in South Africa, through the President of South Africa, through the Presidential Climate Commission, and through the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, who are responsible for climate change issues, they are committed to the just energy transition and to achieving net carbon zero by 2050. However, politically in South Africa, things are highly contested and at the moment, I would say, unstable. We've seen the recent issues around the position of the president, calls for him to resign over various alleged issues of financial misappropriation. But it seems to me that the president of South Africa is holding firm and will survive this challenge. And that augurs well because I think the presidency is one of the areas that strongly supports the process of just energy transition. But I do think that there will be compromises that get made because of the contested political situation in South Africa at the moment.
Thank you very much, Chris Yelland, for your time and contribution. It was a pleasure having you on the program.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, this is where we wrap the conversation today. In the first half of the program, we did look at the situation in Rwanda, where the United States is putting pressure on the government in Kigali to release port processor Aborowa. We just concluded our conversation with Chris Yelland, energy analyst, consultant, electrical engineer, and managing director at EE Business Intelligence, to discuss the financing $8 billion in financing to South Africa in order to resolve its energy crisis and win it off its dependency on coal so as to get it on renewables. Thank you very much for being a part of the program. I'm Gbenga Aborowa. I'll see you next time on The Conversation. Bye-bye.